Welcome to today's show Visite. Thank you for watching again this evening. Of course, we are all moved by the big, difficult events that are happening in this world at the moment. And yet it's nice that you're taking the time to put yourself in the center of attention to do something for yourself, and with that, of course, maybe to understand your own ways better and to take them into your own hands. I thank you very much. She wrote to me and writes that she keeps watching the videos with great interest, here on QS24 TV and especially with my dear colleague Dietrich Klinghardt. It's an unbelievably beautiful way of working together when people who understand each other work together. And those are really great synergies that come together there. She writes that it has struck me for a number of years that a great many people, and she describes almost every third person, suffers from edema. She also says or abdominal water. These are two of the same things, but of course located differently. And that they all get water pills, of course, torsemide or furosemide, which of course can also be stressful for everyone, because of course it constantly forces drainage, while at the same time it is also difficult to leave the house. The question you ask me, Ute, is why do these things happen so frequently? And will they perhaps also be caused by other medications or caused by environmental influences? Alcohol is certainly a problem for many people, the trigger or, of course, cirrhosis of the liver. But I don't drink alcohol myself. I suffer from cardiac insufficiency, but haven't had any other problems so far. But it's only been about 6 to 8 months that I've been suffering from this extreme water retention on my legs, so that I can't fit into any shoes anymore, and of course I can't leave the house. I would very much like to answer this question, dear Ute, because you are right, it is a really big problem. And we have become excellent in our medicinal, symptomatic treatment. I don't want to rule out that we as doctors also use injections of diuretics, for example furosemide, Lasix, for administration. For example, if a patient with a failure of the heart, right heart failure for example, which causes significant pulmonary edema at the moment when this heart does not pump sufficiently, the water backs up to the lungs. Because that's where the oxygen-rich blood comes from, to then find its way through the heart to the entire body. And then we inject these diuretics in high doses so that we can quickly relieve the pressure and lower this excessive volume in the lungs. It was already a major criticism 25 years ago that certain blood pressure medications included hydrochlorothiazide in the recipe at the same time, so a component which activates the kidneys for drainage. In the case of heart failure, and the heart naturally needs a certain pump volume, and in heart failure the heart no longer has it. Then, of course, therapeutically, I can understand it to mean that I activate the kidneys to constantly release more volume of fluid so that the heart does not have to do hard work. In my opinion, this is very short-sighted, because the entire circulatory system depends to a certain extent on volume quantity. We now know that the heart can of course be relieved even in the event of insufficiency. This is also basic cardiological knowledge today. But what we haven't been doing for a long time, or what we're not doing at all, is making sure that this volume of the heart increases and that we look at the mitochondrial metabolism of the heart. And that we ensure an improvement in cardiac output. Because then, of course, the constant administration of diuretics is unnecessary. That we have an improvement in microcirculation. I don't know if you can imagine that. In the context of this Visite program, but also in the context of QS24 TV, we made very interesting broadcasts on dark field microscopy. And you can tell from dark field microscopy alone, how is the microcirculation of this body? If my red blood cells have too low membrane voltage, that is -70 mV, then there is no dynamic, then there is no repulsion, then there is rather a stagnation in the circulation. And this running stagnation, we say rouleau formation, or sometimes like gut rolls, because the system lacks dextrorotatory lactic acid, which the lactic acid bacteria in the gut produce. Then, in the context of microcirculation, the cross-section of the vessels from the heart through the great aorta becomes much smaller. In the end it's just capillaries. And the small capillaries, they only have that cross-section for one red blood cell. But that is the oxygen carrier. The oxygen has to get through, so that it can reach the heart cell, the kidney cell, the liver cell and the brain cell. And life is quite unforgiving, because it cannot compensate for the loss for very long. Not eating for weeks, no problem. Not drinking for 3 days, not much more, but 3 days is fine, no problem. But 3 minutes without breathing. This loss of oxygen means irreversible brain damage. You have to take care of that now. And you can't do it at a top level by activating the kidney for 24 hours, maybe even worsen blood circulation, because if there is a lack of water in the system, of course, even more stagnation in the form of microcirculation disorders comes to light here. In the form of diuretics, the composition of the bile can change so that the bile flow changes here too and is reduced. This can cause constipation problems. What I'm trying to say, the message is that I need to know how is my microcirculation. And a system that is constantly experiencing diuresis because it naturally builds up tension. If the reflux is caused by weak cardiac activity, that's 2,300 liters a day, which has to be returned again and again. And the heart's pumping ability isn't as strong anymore, the liver metabolism isn't as strong anymore, then there is always a backlog in only one direction. And if you hold your shin like a flute and press and see that the dented tissue takes time to tighten up again, then that is an indication of this congestion. And at that moment, I have to tell you quite honestly, these are very important things that you must consider away from any diuretics. Diuretics don't just excrete water. This is potassium, this is magnesium, this is calcium, this is sodium. Anyone who requires a diuretic even temporarily requires high doses of minerals. And I'm really sorry and troubled to see again and again, people take these diuretics and there is a total imbalance in mineral metabolism. Of course, I can also balance this with a lot of high-quality basic food, fresh plant food, wild herb diet, but often it is not enough, often it needs some substitution. And anyone who takes diuretics needs to know what their mineral status is once or every 2 or 3 months. The system is acidic. The stagnation of the erythrocytes is an absolute consequence of a lack of minerals. Because the body cannot eliminate acid without minerals. Acetic acid, gastric acid, carbonic acid, uric acid. You have to be aware of that. Therefore, the administration of diuretics is often a life-saving measure. But a long-term problem is not resolved with diuretics. Because if things don't happen even in a stabilization of a weak metabolism, for example with heart failure, I won't achieve anything. I will always just by relieving more of the entire metabolism and minerals, the mineral balance will be unbalanced. If you measure minerals, then please measure calcium, sodium, chloride extracellularly. However, magnesium and potassium must be measured intracellularly, so in whole blood. This is very important. It is very often measured in the plasma, but there is only 30% potassium. You need to know how much potassium is intracellular. This in turn causes congestion and edema, which of course you can't compensate for by only taking diuretics. You have to take care of the balance. The other thing I wanted to say to you now, don't use a combination drug. And if a relief would be important, then you can do that very, very well with natural diuretics, with solidago, with goldenrod tea, with birch leaf tea, with nettle. Now that nice fresh nettle is out there, especially the little leaves, if you scald them, they have such a really pleasant, beautiful, lovely taste. And when you dry them afterwards and then make a tea with the dry nettle, the tea tastes a bit bitter. I would ask you to add a bit of ginger, use fresh ginger or peppermint leaves. But that creates diuresis, that creates drainage, that creates a blood purification. The stinging nettle is wonderful out there, maybe a bit of a hassle for some to pick. Then put on gloves on, and if you're going to quickly grab and fold over the small hairs, you no longer have such a high histamine content and this burning sensation subsides. But that's not the point now. It's about this wonderful effect of this plant extract on diuresis. You can force that, you can do that, you can also do that as part of a normal detoxification. But in your case you could then just observe how it all behaves. So the heart has to be stabilized so that this diuresis is not needed that much. You can do that with Q10. There are high-quality Q10 preparations, such as Ensman's Q10, ubiquinone or Sanamite. Please use 200 to 300 mg at the beginning and have the Q10 level measured in whole blood. This must be different depending on your previous load as ordinary consumer, perhaps as a competitive athlete, as a tumor patient, as a cardiac patient, it must have a different value. The Ganziman laboratory, for example, can also break it down very well for you, where you can find yourself where. I don't want to give any details now, because these are simply laboratory values, which are very individual and must be clarified with the patient in question. Fact is, every Q10 preparation is produced very quickly, but has no great clinical relevance because there are so many cleaning processes in the production of Q10. It is mostly made from beef heart and that makes the whole thing very intense. And a high-quality Q10 preparation is a bit more expensive, but it should also have a therapeutic value here, please. The other thing is, please think about carnitine, also have parameters of the mitochondrial metabolism measured. A doctor who thinks holistically looks at a mitochondrial metabolism and knows what the mitochondria need for own production of enough energy ATP phosphate. The heart has 4,000 mitochondria per cell. Every other cell has 1,500 to 2,000. If you exercise, you can also use more mitochondrial power in the muscles, but these are all things which will help you have a better flow and a smaller need to receive diuretics tomorrow. The other thing is of course the good mother liver. The liver is the first to absorb the blood in the course of its most diverse tasks. We speak today of 500 to 700 tasks that the liver has for our metabolism. Of course, if there is a temporary functional weakness here, then 2,300 liters must back up somewhere. For a very, very severe liver, well, not failure, but a very strong weakness of the liver, this means it goes in the stomach for a short time. Then there is the so-called ascites, the abdomen becomes big, that is the plasma that expresses itself by the permanent pressure coming from the liver, but that is latent when the liver actually has limited functional capacity or if, of course, pressure builds up in the small pelvis. I'm just thinking about pregnancy, those were completely normal things. I remember that I had 17 kilograms more with our daughter. I thought, my God, everything was difficult. A kilogram of Cuban oranges every day is what my husband had to bring to me because it was such an addiction. And then everything corrected itself again, but that was the volume that had no flow somewhere through the pregnancy. This is all temporary, this process regenerates itself, but of course it also has something to do with edema and with a functional improvement in liver performance, which of course can ensure that this edema is no longer as severe. Because it's not just the whole blood vessel system, it's also the venous system, it's also the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system is integrated into the entire detoxification system. The lymphatic system, just like the blood circulatory system, is a closed circuit. And the lymph itself, the lymph water flows through the veins with a very slight pulsation, and the veins are oxygen-poor but metabolically stressed vessels that return blood to the liver and then back to the heart. The heart pumps it into the lungs, that's where it gets the oxygen, and now it's going back to the new oxygen-rich route. This venous blood must be detoxified and relieved of metabolic waste. And of course, depending on how loaded this lymphatic system is, of course, there is also congestion problems in the context of lymphatic relief. It's sometimes not that easy, but it's mostly lymphatic edema. And in medicine today far too little attention is paid to this lymph problem alone, so getting the lymph flow circulatory going again. In Germany there is the preparation lymphomyosot from Heal. In Switzerland it is called myosotis compositum. If I then put 60 drops in a jug of water and then drink it throughout the day, I go into the regulation improvement of the lymph flow. Drink enough anyway. Cardiac patients are often told, do not drink so much, diuretics, then there is an imbalance, which is not good either. I need the amount of water to really stay hydrated, at least 2 to 2.5 liters. Of course, Lymphatic massage can also be very valuable temporarily, and I don't want to forget that at all. The movement, if you don't move, you simply have to expect that there will be a certain stagnation. That's your case, Ute. You wrote that you can hardly get into your shoes. Now take this fact as an opportunity. So there are shoes that have Velcro fasteners, there are shoes that give you a space for the tension and in no way restrict, in no way wrap heavily, but you can also support the reflux well with dry brushing, for example. You can get out of this path, out of this stagnation. And I don't want to take it for granted that this condition must and can be final for you, but it needs help, it needs support, and maybe with these things I could give some valuable information, and to the other people, of course. With this in mind, thank you again for your inquiries to Visite at QS24.tv. I sincerely wish you all a wonderful week, and I'm really looking forward to this next encounter and your questions, for which I can then prepare myself and get into an exchange with you. Thank you very much and see you soon.